All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Omnic Lab. This is episode 163 for some of you, and for the rest of you, it might be your first one, but welcome. This is a Overwatch strategic podcast. We just break down all of the things that we can within the realm of strategy to help people following the Overwatch League or just playing the game in general to increase their game sense, their understanding of the game, and also their abilities in the game by getting some tips and tricks to help you stir them into the pot before it explodes sometimes, or maybe just kind of like the scientific method formula that works for us because we're players just like you. My name's Rob, and joining me as always from all the way in Georgia, we have the one, the only, Ragnaros the Fire Lord, Andres Gomez. What's up, dude?
I like that intro. Yeah, much better than the Georgia Peach.
The Georgia Peach. How would Ragnaros like to be called the Georgia Peach? I wonder.
I've been doing good. It's a beautiful day over here. And today we're actually bringing you guys an episode that was inspired by one of the listeners. One of the listeners that's also one of the persons have been taking advantage of coaching sessions, gave us a ton of suggestions. And now that the way that Overwatch gets played has changed a little bit, and being comfortable in a role in general is much more important than it's ever been. We figure it'd be a good idea to kind of focus on roles in particular. And if you're trying to learn DPS or you're trying to learn support or tank, what are the things you should keep in mind? What is the lateral movement that you should have in between that role? How you should switch heroes, when you should switch to them, and what are the advantages of picking one over the other? So today we're going to be talking about that. Shout out to Cloctopus for the great ideas, and let's do it.
Absolutely. So what we're going to be doing is talking today about DPS and in the category of knowing your role. So the idea here is that eventually we would like to maybe have a guest revisit this, and relatively soon, even though we're going to be covering this, we'll probably do this again, probably in the next 3-4 months, hopefully. But we'd like to get a specialist guest, but we're going to try to test it on you guys, see what you think, give us some feedback, send us some emails, talk to us in Discord. We're going to do this know your role thing. So think about the going deep episodes for hero specifics. We're still going to try to update those as well. I actually have a lead on a really big Overwatch League guest that I talked to today. So we'll see about who it is and if they're going to be coming in, because I had to go through some hoops and contact an agent, and we'll be talking about that with Andres. This is actually brand new to him.
Ooh, agent. This sounds fancy.
So pretty cool stuff on in the works right now, but I'm trying to iron out what exactly we're going to get them on the show for. In addition, we're going to start with the biggest shotgun approach that we can, and the category that Andres and I have probably the most shared knowledge, which is the DPS category. Andres and I both play regularly at the diamond level for this, and Andres has dipped his toes into the mastery of masters, so on some of the heroes proficiency wise, and I feel like we have a good amount of knowledge there. So that's what we're going to do, but let's go into a few updates for news. First thing is game night. Andres, do you want to do the promo for game night this month?
Yeah, game night is coming up 30th of August. So if you're listening to this, it's probably already happening or it happened. That being said, make sure that if you want to hang out, if you want to make some friends, you want to expand your Overwatch circle, it's the place to be. We're going to be playing 2-2 role lock in it for the first time outside of the PTR, so that's going to be pretty fun. If you miss this one, don't worry. They happen at the end of every month. Just keep an eye out for the last Friday of every month. In this case, is falling on the 30th of August. So I hope to see you guys there.
And on top of that, we also want to reiterate the thing that we talked about at the top of the show, which is our coaching. Our coaching session is available for anyone and everyone on patreon.com/OmnicLab that signs up at the $2.50 level or the platinum level label and above. So that includes our diamond patrons sponsorship level. Those guys have access to it, as well as the gals over there. Some of them are taking advantage of it, but I'm not sure about timing or availability on some of the folks that are in between those ranks, because you can choose what rate you like to pay. So maybe you're a little bit above Patreon level for platinum, but not quite diamond. That middle range that still covers you for one coaching session a month with one of the hosts of your choosing. And you can rotate back and forth if you keep your monthly payments going. In addition, we also want to shout out at the top of the show, again, our sponsor. Check out topscoresolutions.com if you're developing businesses, apps, services, organizations, content looking in the realm of esports or community and business, education, analytics. Those type of categories are really, really good for talking with our friend Ben Wiggs, or not Ben Wiggs, Ben W. I don't even think I got his last name right. I've been calling him Ben W for so long. But yeah, go talk to Ben or I Need Peeling in Discord. They run the Discord for their service. You can go check out their website. You can PM them in Discord. They're very, very available to talk to you pretty frequently. All right, I think that's going to do it for all of our sponsors and our friends and announcements. So let's get into the heroes. Andres, let's talk about who is in the category of DPS first. So let's kind of just run down the line of who's in this that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. And let's do this, and let's go ahead and kind of categorize some of these heroes. And these
Sure.
categories that we're gonna use are mostly relevant, is because they surround the skill that you need to use them. And it's good to categorize them in this sense, because if you get particularly good at a certain skill, it's a little bit easier to switch to another one of these heroes who also is very particularly influenced by that skill. And what I'm talking about is, for example, hit scan versus projectile. Hit scan heroes are all the heroes that hit immediately. There's no travel time to their bullets. You aim, and whenever you click, that's where it shoots. If you click on top of a hero, you'll hit it. If you click somewhere where another hero is not, you will miss. That's what we're talking about.
When the shot is fired, the damage is done.
Yeah,
so the shot
instant travel
registers
time.
the second you click. It hits on the target.
Compared to projectile heroes. Projectile heroes are those who their attack does have a travel time. So like a Farah rocket, for example, whenever you fire it, you see the rocket come out of your gun, it has to travel a certain amount of time, and then when it hits something, it'll explode. That's what we're talking about with projectile heroes. So a few examples of hit scan are things like, or heroes like Ash, McCree, Reaper, even though he's very short range, is also a hit scan hero. Tracer also falls in that category. Soldier 76, Widowmaker is probably like the biggest staple of hit scan heroes. And when we're talking about projectile, we're talking about Pharah, Genji, Hanzo, Mei, all of the heroes that have a travel time to their abilities. Now, why it's important to separate these heroes, and I know that most people have been playing Overwatch are very familiar with what a hit scan is, what a projectile is, but if you're a person that specializes in projectiles, let's say you've practiced your Pharah or your Genji a lot, chances are you've become very familiar with the physics of the game. You become very familiar with the travel time of your projectiles, with how heroes move, and how fast they can displace themselves from one area to the next. It's a very required skill, because when you're playing projectile heroes, it's all about your timing and your prediction. You have to guess where heroes are going to be, and you have to have a good internal sense of timing of how long is your abilities going to take to get to that position. The cool
This
thing
is
about
really
it,
important with role mastery, and that's kind
yes.
of why we're bringing this up.
The cool thing about it is that even though all these projectile heroes have different timings to them, not all of them hit at the same speeds, right? Like a Fire Rocket doesn't travel at the same speed that Genji Shurikens does. They don't travel at the same speed that Doomfist, Little Rocket Fist does, right? All these have different timings, but that being said, the engine in which they live, the engine of Overwatch, never changes. And the targets that you're aiming at don't change either. So even though when you're switching from one of these heroes to the other, you will have to adjust your timings slightly. As long as you're used to how the game plays and like the general speed, that adaptation is a little bit easier, if that makes sense.
And something to keep in mind is the way in which you approach fights, or the positions that you take, or the big catch-all 22 of like, or catch 22 that people always say is, this person's bad, they have bad game sense. This person's bad, they have bad positioning. Those are the two biggest things that people like to use as buzzwords in Overwatch for somebody's really good or really bad in those two things of being game sense, their understanding of the game, their ability to have kind of that sixth sense of what's around them, without looking or while looking, and then also the ability to kind of really lock in on where they need to be at all times, the positioning side of things. So even though you may be more able to swap between the hit scan heroes easier because you're very familiar with mastery of the hit registration, the aspect of when I click, I don't have to lead my shots. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to flick and click onto the target that I'm trying to shoot. The positioning on all the heroes is very different based off of even just a slight ability that they may have or the range on their gun. Those type of things inform how they need to be played and optimized, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, with hit scan, just like projectiles, there are very particular skills that you can develop with them. Like
And you can
Rob
switch
said,
between them a bit freer.
yeah, you can switch a little bit more. Like Rob said, with projectiles, you have to focus on leading your shots a lot, right? So you have to learn what's the right amount of gap of space that you should leave between where your target is and where you want your rocket to hit, for example. With hit scan is a bit different though, because you're not trying to predict ever, right? You're more of trying to react in real time. You're trying to see where their position is currently, and you're trying to lead or to move your cursor right on top of them, which intrinsically makes you aim completely different from projectiles. While with projectiles, you're trying to see like where is it going to be and where should I be shooting. With hit scan, you're in real time actively changing where your cursor is to match where their position is. So with projectiles, you tend to be more leady. You tend to kind of like aim a little bit ahead of the heroes. With hit scan, you tend to be a little more flicky, where you're maybe slightly tracking the hero. You're following them with your cursor loosely, but when you want to shoot and when you want to press the mouse click, you do a quick flick to where they're standing right at the time. And
And you
it,
call these micro click or micro flicks or micro corrections, where you make these small movements and adjustments from a base center. And other times you have the thing that Andres and I talked about with our friends on the placement. With our aim guy, we talked about placing and waiting to move. And then we had the other one, which is the big swinging 180s into the scope. Like those are the crazy flicks that you'll see. But anything can be qualified as a flick shot as long as you're moving the mouse while you're shooting.
And now, the whole reason why we're kind of talking about these skills in particular is because it's easier to practice one of them and get really good at one of them at a time. So let's say you're a player who's playing a lot of Widowmaker. I think that you'll have an easier time switching to somebody like McCree, like Soldier 76, like Bastion, because all those heroes, even though they're not exactly like Widowmaker, tend to aim relatively similarly to how you aim with Widowmaker. Obviously, there's some nuances, and we have even talked about tracking heroes, for example, which are heroes that you want to hold the cursor on your enemy for as long as possible. And certain hit skin heroes, for example, like Soldier 76, are like that. And likewise with projectiles, right? If you develop like that projectile skill, it's easier for you to jump from, let's say, a Genji to a Pharah. And that's not to say that they're individual skills. Honestly, these are all styles of aiming that you should be learning simultaneously. But like everything, it just requires a time investment. And in your journey as learning as a player, there'll be times where you want to focus on one over the other, but don't neglect all of them, right?
Absolutely. There's the other thing that's kind of something that should be at least brought up is the difficulty in which you have switching between projectile heroes in general. Their aiming sets, their projectile speeds are astronomically large in some cases and very narrow in others. Just the speeds alone, by the how fast a rocket can go versus a Mei projectile versus a Hanzo arrow. Like these things all have different speeds that you have to kind of build up getting used to. They have different fire rates. They have different ways in which they're used. For example, if you're playing Pharah and Junkrat, you can potentially learn both of these heroes simultaneously by continuing learning them because they have a spam style of play. You're locking down zones by spamming certain targets or certain areas or something of the like to make sure that in general you're not trying to take all these crazy 1v1s like you may see, but like usually Pharahs and Junkrats are trying to rain down lots of pressure instead of like confirming, if that makes sense. Or if they can confirm, they go for it. You know, they have the ability to do that. But then you have the other heroes like Genji and Doomfist who have projectiles in their kit, but they're kind of this, I use my projectiles when I go in and then I get out. Or I use my projectiles to get my ult and then I go in and then I get out. So these projectiles have very different styles of play, but you'll see some of the things overlap. And if you're learning to be a DPS player and or learning to master a specific hero and you want to be able to flex to the kind of the rainbow of DPS that's available to you, you definitely start branching out kind of in the same color scheme. If you're playing a yellow hero, maybe you should go to reds and oranges first before you kind of switch all the way over to the blues, okay? That's kind of the idea.
And that's not to say that you should never swap to a hero that's not like, if
sure.
you're practicing hit scan, don't go to projectile, because you definitely can do that. And there's players out there who are like an amazing Genji, but also a great Widowmaker. So there's a little bit of overlap, but as you're learning the game, yeah, it's usually easier for you to kind of like keep in mind these categories and what skills are going to be required for you. Talking about skills that are going to be required of you, there's also two categories that we should touch on, because some of these heroes are very dependent on their gun and their primary fire as being the most defining factor of whether you're good at that hero or not. So we're talking about guys like Widowmaker, right? If you have insane aim with Widowmaker, you will be doing great in the match. That's all that is required mostly. Your abilities obviously are powerful, but they're not how you're getting kills or how you're advancing your team's goal, right? It's more dependent on how many heads you can click with Widowmaker. But when you go to heroes like Doomfist is what we want to call an ability hero. Doomfist doesn't revolve around his primary fire or his gun. He revolves around his abilities and his cooldowns, and to be really effective, you have to be able to use his abilities in tandem and efficiently. And his gun is mostly just kind of to fill in the gaps. So I just wanted to make that distinction because, again, gun heroes are going to require a particular set of skills from you, specifically high mechanical skills, good aim, right? If you can hit your shots, you'll be doing great. Ability heroes, slightly different. And sorry, what were we going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that it doesn't mean when we say ability heroes that the primary fire isn't included. Because you can't play the game without shooting things with your primary or secondary. Every character has one, okay, in general.
Right. And gun-centric heroes also have amazing abilities that, if you're using them correctly, will, get you more kills. But we're talking more about the emphasis of the hero, right? Where is the main thing that you should be emphasizing? Another example of ability heroes can be Genji or Mei or Sombra, Symmetra, Torbjorn, where sure, the primary fire, it's important in all of these heroes, but a lot of the times, the reason you're bringing them is because of the efficiency of their skills or the effectiveness.
The synergy that they make in the canvas together.
Exactly. Sombra is very powerful because her ability to hack and EMP and using these abilities correctly are really going to get you really far with Sombra. But if you're just focusing on trying to kill things with your gun with Sombra, you might be better off going to a hero like Tracer, where she's more centered on her gun, right? Being able to track people with Tracer and hitting them in the head can be devastating. It can be a huge amounts of burst damage that you can't really do with Sombra. So Tracer, although Tracer is in a weird spot, right? Because she's
Tracer
very demanding
and
with her gun and her
Pharah.
abilities.
Yeah, I think Tracer and Pharah were the hardest ones for me individually to pin down where I would put these as a player, because Pharah is super defining with her gun, but she's also very defining that she's the only one that literally can just fly forever.
Yeah.
And that's very, very defining. And then Tracer, on the other hand, is super defining by having the highest like damage tracking thing that's on the planet. Like she can do so much damage in this small range. But in order to do that, they have to reduce her hit points. They have to give her a ton of mobility and survivability outside of those guns, make her very much a glass cannon if she doesn't have those abilities. And if she doesn't have her recall, it's even further. So, like, some of these heroes kind of fit the bill of both. And if they do that sort of thing, they still kind of lean one way or the other. And so that's why we kind of put Tracer more in the category of like abilities, because you're basically constantly using them all the time. So we put her there, and then we put Farah into the shooting gun category because most of her stuff is just staying in the air, shoot, 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 shoot. So that's kind of why I put them where I put them in our show notes here. But
Yeah.
there's one more thing that Andres wanted to bring up, which was the tracking and the styles of aim outside of hit scan projectile, right? These things are super important because even in projectile, you have heroes that are still doing a significant amount of tracking. And based on how fast the projectiles can go, can determine how fast your flicks may need to be or where they need to go, depending on how far away you are from the target.
Yeah, and there's heroes that kind of combine a few of the abilities, right? Like, for example, Symmetra, her primary fire is a very tracking centered sort of ability, right? You have to hold your cursor on top of the enemy as much as you can, but your secondary fire, your energy orbs that you shoot, those are a little bit more projectile, right? And they're based more on your prediction, on your leading, and
or spam.
or spam a choke point, etc. So yeah, a lot of these heroes combine a few of these abilities. The reason why we're naming all of these is mostly so you guys can have a mental picture of what are the strengths of some of these heroes, what are the skills that are going to be required to pull some of these off, and maybe if you want to focus on a particular group, maybe what are the things that you should keep in mind to do that. And think more of this as a spectrum rather than just like hard categories where these people fall. If you think about like ability heroes versus gun heroes, think of like Widowmaker in one extreme and like Doomfist in the other extreme, and then the rest of the DPS sort of fall somewhere in between, with maybe like Tracer and Farah kind of being like right there in the middle, a good balance of using your abilities and you being able to hit with your gun.
Okay, so now that we kind of laid a lot of groundwork to kind of get you into the realm of this hero does tracking. Tracking basically means you click and hold or you burst fire by clicking and lifting a lot and tracking where the person is moving on your screen, like you're tracing a line. Projectile and hit scan, we already went through those, but those are the kind of main aim styles of like single shot hit points and tracking. So Soldier, Tracer, Sombra, all of these characters and Bastion are tracking heroes, and Symmetra when she's using her beam, May when she's using her beam. But projectile heroes could be a little bit more flicky, they could be a little bit more spammy, those type of things. So the reason we're bringing these up is we want to talk now about the core, which is synergies, because now that we have a 2-2-2 setup, now we can actually do these things called knowing your role. We can talk about if you're in queue and you see someone else pick a hero before you picked your DPS hero, or you see someone picking a Reinhardt, or you see someone picking that Ana, you see somebody dropping in the Lucio, you see the gigantic Zarya pick, you know what to do, and you know what you're looking for to play the heroes you want to play. That's kind of our idea here that we want to do, is kind of giving you, if you have a pool of one or more heroes, or two or more heroes, that you can actually choose between them based off of what your team's presenting you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the DPS role in general, because I think there's some misconceptions of what the DPS should be doing and what they should be accomplishing, what they bring to the table. When you're thinking about a 2-2-2 setup and you're thinking about your DPS, the DPS are the people who bring in the heat. They have great ability to put a lot of damage into the enemy team. Now, it's very important that you keep a few things in mind. Things like, what is my team playing? What is the enemy team playing? What map are we on right now? These things are important from the get-go because not every hero can be effective in every situation. And depending on what is surrounding you is how efficient you're going to be able to be. One thing in particular that I see a lot of people make a mistake with DPS is they pick the wrong type of damage for the fight. Let's talk about maybe bunker comp, since it's one of the most common compositions right now. Going up
Sure.
against an Orisa, maybe like an Orisa Sigma or an Orisa Roadhog, where the whole team is kind of behind the shield and just spamming at you from a very safe position. When you are going up against something like that, you have a couple of options. One, you break the shield. You play to break the shield. You want to break that as fast as possible and not let them just kind of sit behind it and play around with it. If you're going with a composition that wants to break the shield, you got to make sure that you at least have a couple other things. Do you have tanks that can actually play that battle, right? Do you have your own Orisa, your own Roadhog, maybe your own Orisa Sigma, right? Do you have something where you can actually stand in front of them and shoot at them without immediately dying? If the answer is yes, then you can play the shield war. Now, as a DPS player, you should be thinking to yourself, how can I win the shield war for my team? So maybe picking a hero like May, if you're playing just breaking the shield, is not the best idea because her damage output is a little bit low. Maybe picking somebody like Hanzo is a much better idea, right? Because he can actually stand behind your Orisa shield and spam and deal a ton of damage to that shield very, very fast. So now you're helping your team win that battle. You were gonna say?
Absolutely. And we want to make sure that we understand that we're not hating on a particular strategy. We're just saying if we want to go with the strat of play barrier break, we want to break their barrier first and win every fight this way, then May's not great in that setup. But like May might be fantastic in this setup if you do a different goal for the team. If you're presenting, hey, we're just going to wall off and walk around. We're just going to ignore their barrier. Or if they set it up, we're just going to move around it every time. So you're basically maneuvering your team and thinking about what your team is presenting you to allow this kind of thing to kind of take place. What do you need in that setup? Well, you need some mobility. So maybe you need another hero to help you out, move quicker. Maybe you want that Reinhardt instead of the Orisa because you can get in and get out. Maybe you want Sigma because he can hit around the shield. Maybe you would like to have Diva so you can kind of have that extra little bit of mitigation while on the move. And then furthermore, having a Lucio in the support category makes this even faster. Okay, so these are all of those type of setups if you want to do that. And the shield break, you can actually make shield break heroes, hero-based picks outside of DPS too, but we're trying to really focus down on that. So let's stick with this shield break idea for just a few more minutes for those of you that maybe bring up the exception. May's really good in this against this comp. It's like, yes, it is, but if we're going shield break specifically, it's not.
So May is good in this comp because the idea has swapped a little bit. Let's ignore the shield a little bit and let's focus on maybe getting like halt hooks, right? And the May can really allow us to like play like that, or vice versa. If they're playing halt hooks, that may really allow us to avoid those halt hooks ourselves. So it really depends on what your team is trying to go for. One of the worst mistakes that I sometimes see, and is very common, is you're, for example, in a map like Paris, and you're on attack, on first point attack. You know how little is that choke point that you have to go through in that first point. And sometimes certain tanks will go like Hammond Diva or like Hammond Winston or something like that. Maybe even like Hammond Zarya, Winston Zarya.
Sure.
Immediately as a DPS player, you should note that you're not going to have a shield to hide behind. Heroes like McCree, for example, become extremely unattractive in situations like this. Even though McCree could be effective, the reason why it just isn't is because your tanks are not enabling you to do what McCree wants to do. You have no cover. You're very slow. Going through that choke point as McCree is almost a death sentence if you don't have some sort of shield or speed boost or something that can cover you and keep you alive while you go through. So suddenly, if you choose to go McCree in this situation, even though you're the best McCree in the world, you're hitting headshots, you're doing this whole thing, your damage will just be very ineffective. You'll have to play very afraid. You'll have to play from angles that are not very good. The rest of your team is not really playing that shield break anymore. Hammond's just trying to get behind them and maybe boop him or pile drive on top of them. Diva's trying to follow his lead, or Zarya's saving her shield for when he lands. So there's just no resources to help you out in this case. And you make your life so hard by trying to force this pick into this composition. The map is not in your favor. The enemy team composition is not in your favor. You're probably going to be shooting at shields anyway because you're not going to have a good angle on any of them. Your positioning is going to be really bad because you have no heroes to enable you to get into a position where you can actually be efficient. So all these reasons kind of converge together. And even if you think, but I'm hitting my shots and I'm putting damage in, that damage is just not being significant, and you're sacrificing so much more to play your comfort pick.
The other thing too about picking a comfort pick in certain situations, and I'm not going to say this in general because we have had a lot of players that literally only play one hero at the highest level, and they have asked a lot of their team, because what that means is those teams that are at the top level or while they're climbing recognize this person's not going to switch, they're going to play this thing, so we need to commit as a team to perform exactly what this individual player is trying to do for a composition. And that's why those players are getting success, is because you have all of these other moving 5 pieces around them helping enable them to play a specific style, for example.
Absolutely.
And Andres, let's just build this illustration on Paris with McCree, and you have 2 mobile tanks, D.Va, Ball, Winston, D.Va. Those 3 set up in a mix and match are all mobile heroes without barriers that are significant to get you through the choke as McCree. And even though you're doing a really good job at your game plan on McCree, your game plan is anti what your team is trying to accomplish, and so you're basically playing the game as if you don't exist a lot of the time. Just because of that. Like, your threat isn't big enough of a threat because you're split off from the team, shooting into a barrier, or getting in an unfavorable position that you're just trying to survive and not really contributing. That's why this is hard to do in this specific illustration. And this is just one example of many. And there's let's shift gears a little bit, because I want to use another really good option, and I want to use this transition to thank Shazir in the chat for tossing us 1,000 bits and saying that he's not going to be here due to meetings. This guy's a gem. Thank you, Shaz. Really appreciate that. But let's go to Ilios, which is a control map, very different from an assault, and let's go to the Well in particular, because now we have 3 maps in one with Well, Shrine, and Village for Nepal. But this specific one, the Well, gives us
I think
a
you're
lot
mixing
of options.
Ilios with Nepal.
You're right.
We have
Ilios has Lighthouse,
Well,
Ruins,
and Ruins.
and Well.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I went straight to Nepal for no reason.
I do love
But
Nepal.
the Well, the big hole in the ground, okay? If you're going to this map, some of these maps actually have a very wide area of heroes that are available to them that you can find success on, and this is one of them. You can run a Risa and Hog. You can run a Reinhardt. You can run a super mobile Winston ball comp. You can do lots of things. And the reasoning behind this is because when you capture the point, you don't actually have to stay there. You can kind of maneuver around. You can set up different strategies to kind of hold that point. You can basically ebb and flow. You can pull off the point, let them come in, and then dive on them afterwards. You can just stay there. You can push into their spawn. You can utilize an entire comp that's like, if you guys want to be on the point, you're going to die in the hole. That's your Orisa Hog, your Lucio, your Ball, anything that has an ability to boop somebody or hack them while they're going over the hole. They can't move. This kind of a map suits itself to a large area of heroes, whereas Paris is very narrow in what options you may have in how you approach. And also, just kind of a side note, this is probably why people hate specific maps more, is because their options are more limited.
Yeah, some maps will really limit your options in the sense that some heroes will be harder to pull off because you just have more obstacles to get through. I want to touch a little bit on damage versus significant damage, because as a DPS player, it's a very important concept to recognize, and I think it's one of the things that takes the longest to learn. There's one thing as just spitting damage out there. In Overwatch, it's such a hectic game that as long as you're alive and you're with your team, you will probably be able to be dealing some damage. But here's the thing. There's a difference between just regular spam damage, just being exchanged between teams and getting thrown around. And there's a difference between that and significant and purposeful damage. And as a DPS, you should try to concentrate on the latter rather than the former. Like the spam damage is cool and all, and it's important. Don't get me wrong. It's important to put pressure on the enemy team and not just let them take positions for free, right? You have to put certain pressure on chokes, on certain doors, or in certain hallways, or whatever it is, so that the enemy can't just take those positions for free. But when you're ready to you want to get a kill, or you really want to put that pressure on the enemy team, it's important that you deal your damage in a moment where it's going to be very significant. So what do I mean by this? If we go back to the example in Paris, and let's say you're playing with a ball, for example, as long as you're spamming in the choke and the ball is nowhere around, chances are you're not going to get a lot of done, right? You might be spamming at the shield, you may get a few shots on the heroes behind the shield, but that's going to get healed very fast. Unless you're maybe like a Widowmaker, a Hanzo, and you're able to find like a very sneaky angle and get a headshot on somebody, you're probably not going to be able to get a kill very easily. But if you are paying attention to your Hammond, you can see his position or his little chevron in the back of the enemy team, kind of like approaching them, and you're keeping that in mind. And the second that you see him kind of like pile drive or push him, that's when you try to get your damage in, right? It makes a huge difference because one, he's probably getting in some damage. So like whoever is getting hit, it's already going to be a little bit damaged. So now your damage is adding up to that damage that the Hammond has already dealt. If the rest of your team, your other DPS or even your supports or the off tank is paying attention to this too, and they put their damage in at the same time, now you're cooking with fire, right? Like now you don't have to do the whole job yourself. You're just paying attention to what target is getting focused. You're paying attention to what abilities your other heroes are doing. And more importantly, you're using the opportunity that your tank has created for you. And now you get your kill. That's when you get your easy kill, right? That's when you make your move. When you see your Hammond pile drive on somebody, that's when you grapple with your Widowmaker and you flow around them. You try to get the shot in from above without the shield being there. Like that one shot could be the difference, right? That could get the kill right there. You don't even have to get a headshot sometimes with it because you did it at the appropriate time.
And it's really interesting that you said that because like tanks in general in Overwatch are pretty much opportunists.
Yes.
Opportunity makers, at their core.
I would say.
All they do is generate opportunities for the other heroes to succeed. And in general, the supports are enablers. They try to enable the people to move. They enable people to get in. They enable people to stay. They disable. They're enablers and disablers because, you know, Ana shuts down healing. Zenyatta enables his team by disabling a hero's health pool by giving you 30% more damage on them or 25% more damage on them, however much that is after the 10,000 nerfs they've given Zen, you know, something like that. But then in the DPS category, you are the playmaker. You're in the driver's seat, and if you're not paying attention to what the enemies are doing, what your enablers and what your opportunists are doing, you're going to be severely lacking in how you're able to take advantage of your resources and the opportunities that are being displayed in front of you.
Yeah, and I want to call tanks opportunity makers because the DPS are more of the opportunists. They're the ones who want to keep an eye out for these opportunities and kind of capitalize on them.
They're the initiators. Yeah, they're the fight beginners, the fight enders. You know what I mean? Like they're the guys that kind of set the pace. They're kind of like the pace car.
The deal closers.
Yeah. Okay. Enough of the metaphors. Okay. But when you're playing DPS, sometimes you have to work hand in hand with those tanks in order to perform a setup. Because, for example, when you're playing Doomfist or Genji or Sombra, these heroes in particular are very, very big on creating opportunities as well. Those heroes can have the ability to go invisible. They can close gaps very quickly. They can kind of go in tandem with the tank at the same time, so timing becomes even more important. Rocket punches, seismic slams, uppercuts with ball slams, with Rhinehammers with hacks, these type of things. So sometimes you need to think about when you're picking a hero, looking at the roster, what is your role in this composition? What are you trying to do? How do you win a team fight? How do you take the point? How do you defend the point? These type of things are what should be in your mind, not what hero do I want to play. If we're in it to win it, and we have a few things in our toolbox of heroes that we can play and we like to play, we need to start informing our decisions a little bit more than beyond the heroes that we like to play.
Now, that's good that you mentioned that, because that also should be kept in mind. There are certain heroes that can be played in different playstyles to fill in different things that your composition is trying to do. Let's go back to the example of Hanzo. Hanzo is actually a very versatile hero in the sense that you can use him for many different purposes depending on what your team wants to do. You want to play the shield break battle? Hanzo can do that. You want to play off angles more as a sniper where you're trying to divide the attention of the enemy team or find angles where the enemy team can't shoot. You can do that with Hanzo as well. You want to fight in tight choke points where the enemy team is very clustered together and AoE damage comes in handy very much. Hanzo is great too. Turns out that your dragon
Storm
works.
arrows.
Yeah, Storm Arrows or Dragon works really well for that kind of situation. So there's heroes that are very versatile, and if you're a good player and you learn to recognize what your team is trying to use or trying to do, you can utilize them in many different ways to match that playstyle. A good example of this is the bunker meta. The bunker meta has seen some involvement in the last few months. First, the double sniper were the thing to do with bunker meta because you had a very core team of Orisa, Roadhog, and your healers sort of advancing the front line and being a threat by themselves, right? The halt hook combo by themselves was huge.
Right.
They didn't even have to fight for shield break. Actually, that composition in particular didn't care about the shield as much because they were using the halts around the shield, and then both of your snipers would sort of get angles that would surround the enemy team. And because the enemy team was playing also a bunker composition, they were not very spread out. They usually would hang out behind the shield, allowing you to sort of like circle this bunker with the sniper so that the snipers didn't even have to worry about the shield anymore. They're just have good angles on it, and the Orisa Roadhog is kind of putting the pressure in the front line. So this composition totally ignored the shield and was like, we don't care for breaking it. We're just going to sort of surround and have threats from every side. That has changed a little bit lately. The double sniper in certain maps has become a little bit more unpopular, mainly because a lot of people have been bringing Mei, which makes the halt hook combo really inefficient. And if you're playing against a bunker that has a Mei, your front line is going to struggle a lot. And then now having your DPS spread out sort of doesn't make much sense, right? Because if your front line's getting destroyed and your DPS is not there to support the front line, now you have a problem, right? So now slowly teams have been saying, well, we can't really spread out our DPS because this Mei is going to wreck us. So let's bring our own Mei to match that aggression. And what else can we fit in here? Mei is not...
Symmetra.
Yeah, Symmetra or Reaper. Both of these have become increasingly popular in the meta because now, instead of spreading your DPS, you're bringing your DPS back to the front line to support them so that Mei can't really just run amok and do whatever she wants. More importantly, this composition can also ignore the shield. If you put in a Lucio and maybe a Moira with it, now you have a composition that can just plow through. In this case, sometimes you even switch your tanks and you switch them for Reinhardt and Zarya. And
Just for the mobility.
yeah, and at this point, you're like, we don't even have to play the shield break or we don't have to spread around the bunker. What if we just go through the bunker, ignore the shield, let's pass it with speed boost? But now we have DPS that can do this, right? We have a Reaper that is insane at close range DPS, right? That will eat
And
up
sustain.
an Orisa and a Roadhog in no time. Is a huge threat against the enemy Mei as well. So now our DPS is doing significant damage, right? and the thing that we want to do as a team, cross the shield. Now we have a DPS that is good for that, and our other DPS may also amazing at close range, right? You can disable, freeze heroes, you can split them apart with the wall. So these DPSs really fit with that strategy.
But it's super important that we remember at all times what our other allies are doing, because your success on these heroes is superbly dependent on what your other teammates are doing. These type of strategies at Overwatch League are sometimes just what's the strongest thing right now, and other times it's not. It's what's the strongest thing that you can do when all 6 players are in tandem working together to make it happen. Because if you put that same setup against another team, one team looks like Vancouver and one team doesn't sometimes.
Like Boston.
Okay? So, like Boston. Okay? And other times you have teams on the ladder, like even in your plat or your gold or your silver games, where people are just not they're playing the exact same hero picks and not having any form of the same coordination, any form of the same hit registration, just not hitting shots, and also just not even really doing the comp correctly.
Well, it's good that you brought that up, yeah, because it's so important. Like, coming back to the same composition that we're talking about with Reaper and May and Ryan Zarya. Let's say that you run that composition on the ladder. You're like, you know what? Omnic Lab told me that this is good. We're going to do great. Just, go through them, no problem. And then the second you go through them, you realize that your Reaper is flanking on the left side. And he has taken a super long route. I don't know what he was thinking. He maybe wants to get to the backline without being unnoticed.
Yeah.
But he's nowhere near our tanks. And now we've crossed the shield and we're here fighting, but we don't have a Reaper. And that huge amount of damage and pressure that he would have brought is not here anymore. So now our composition looks rather weak, right? Or maybe your May didn't engage at the right time. Maybe she got distracted by some sort of flanker, and she went to chase the flanker while the rest of your team tried to push in, right? And it fell apart. The composition looks super weak. You're not getting any kills. Your tanks are sort of getting destroyed. So it's very important, why I said before, why significant damage or being where you need to be and putting that pressure, that threat, when it needs to be done as a DPS is super key. If you're the type of DPS that finds yourself looking for like interesting angles but wasting a lot of time, and there's fights going on that you're not a part of, it means that you're missing out on that threat, on that pressure that you're putting out. So as a DPS, it's very important that you know where you have to be and when the damage has to come out. You have to be very timely with that.
Now, again, we want to reiterate what we said earlier, which is, as a DPS player, you are now responsible for to keep track of more things than anyone else in the game. You have to keep track of everything that the enemies are doing and what pressure you have on yourself in order to inform where you can stand. Then you need to be playing in such a way, in that same mindset of watching and observing how your team is moving and playing to take advantage of the opportunities that they may generate accidentally or on purpose, despite how a team fight is going. You are in the driver's seat for taking advantage of the situation. And sometimes you are also responsible for communicating. Even if it looks like a bad spot, you can flip something on the dime and say, this is now a good thing because now we have a pick. Now we're 5v5. Now we fight even. Or maybe now we're fighting 5v6 and we're down. Or the opposite, now we're fighting 6v5 and we have the advantage, so we can push. And making sure that people on your team are not as aware of the kill feed on the top right or what is actually going on because they don't have vision of the fight. That is super important for you. And on top of that, this is also where I want to transition a bit and say the number one problem I have with my own gameplay and with every player that I've coached is the awareness of what your team is doing, not what the enemy team is doing. Everyone is very in tune with what the enemy team is doing if they're within the 4 frames of your screen in front of you, or even within a quick turn left and right without going too far. You can generally have a good scope of what's going on. But support, tank, and DPS players at large, including me and Andres, our biggest problem is, what is my team doing? Because that's the hardest thing to do, because you're trying to coordinate with them. And coordinating with your team when everyone has different opinions of what's going on with the enemy team is really, really, really hard, especially when you have to work with how they're enabling you, what opportunities are they bringing to play.
Absolutely. I think that another misconception with DPS too, both from players that play DPS and players who are playing with DPS, like tanks and supports, is that the DPS has to carry. Don't get me wrong, DPS can definitely carry, but so can tanks and so can supports. And that responsibility doesn't solely rely on the DPS. Um, I see in a lot of matches DPS get flamed if nothing is dying, like, oh, the DPS are just not killing anything. And sometimes that is the case. Sometimes your DPS are having a bad day, they're just not hitting shots. Maybe they're not using the adequate DPS for your composition. Maybe they're just not timing it right, or doing it at the right times, right? The damage is not being significant. You're just throwing damage out there randomly. But that being said, the DPS is more there to provide support fire, right? They capitalize on opportunities. They can finish off enemies. They can flank. They can do all these things. They can do a lot of burst damage that some of the other heroes don't have access to. But that being said, it's a team effort and everyone has to be pitching in, right? The DPS is not supposed to be just carrying out there. And the biggest thing about this is that when DPS kind of start getting a little flustered or they feel like they're not doing a lot, they sort of assume this attitude that I just gotta go out there and kill somebody. And I see so many mistakes because they just try to go in their Rambo style and like 3v1 somebody, or like their Genji, they'll Dragon Blade deep into the enemy team without any support, immediately get killed or something like that. So don't think that you have to kill everyone on the enemy team as a DPS. Make your life a little bit easier. And like we've said before, utilize the opportunities that maybe your tanks are creating for you. Maybe some support created opportunity, like Anna slept somebody in the back. Be paying attention to those things. And when that happens, go get the easy kill. You don't need to do like a 180 grapple hook shot with Widow every like 5 seconds to win the game, right? Like take the easy kills that your team is providing for you and make sure that when those opportunities arise, you're there as a DPS to finish them off and put the damage where it's very significant. Now that being said, sure, as a Hanzo, sometimes you get 3 headshots in a row and like, well, you just won that point for your team. Awesome. If you're the kind of
3
Hanzo,
people are dead and the game's over.
If you're the kind of Hanzo that can do that,
Sometimes it happens.
Well, great. But it's not going to happen that often, especially as you climb up the ranks and you start facing people that are better and better and better and are just not going to give you those opportunities. So even though, yes, you're the heart of the damage of the team, don't think that you have to put the team on your back every time. In fact, lean on your team to make things easier for you. And as a team, try to create opportunities for your DPS to be able to succeed. Sometimes your DPS might look like they're not doing a lot, but it comes down to the fact that maybe your tanks are not providing very many opportunities. Maybe your Reinhardt has been sitting on the choke point the entire match, and your DPS are very handcuffed in the angles that they can take, right?
I wanna go back to the whole generating opportunities and being more self-sustaining versus having to be babysat, like the whole Widowmaker versus McCree thing that we talked about in kind of the pre-show and a little bit earlier. When you play Overwatch in a particular game, some heroes are kind of not really an option outside of having a specific setup. And what I mean by that is, like Andres discussed with McCree, you really need something with a barrier or a speed boost or some way for him to kind of move as a pair or as a unit of 6 or a small squad to kind of stick with them. He's very much buddy system type hero. And in tandem with that, you also want to make sure that your supports and your tanks kind of are in a way that you can take advantage of their hero picks too. So if your supports are like, they're really good at playing Mercy and they insta-lock Mercy, there's a couple heroes that you can play that are really good with that. Pharah is one of the heroes that I would say is almost like crippling to play without Mercy. And it's not just because of the popularization of Pharah and Mercy together. It's not just that. It's that if you are playing a Mercy and a Pharah together and you're playing it properly, meaning you're not keeping the left click, the healing beam on the Pharah, you're leaving the ability to constantly boost her and also not leave where your Pharah is in general and kind of not really have to babysit much of the team. If you guys can kind of pair up and split, you guys are a force to be reckoned with the entire game. It's really irritating, especially at lower tiers of play. If you have a Pharah player that is decently like providing damage, and you have a Mercy player who is really hard to kill, easy to damage boost, and knows when not to heal and continue to provide this, those two players advance very, very quickly because people who potato shots a lot can't really get rid of them. And on top of that, you have other heroes that are very self-sustainable. Soldiers and Hanzos and Widowmakers have this ability, and you could even say Tracers and Genjis to a certain extent. Genjis are still pretty healing dependent heroes and dependent on what the tanks are doing, but in general, these heroes have the capability of going in with a very small window and deleting the entire team very quickly based off of a couple setups.
I'm kind of glad that you brought this up. Because so far we've been talking about, hey, if you're a DPS player, how do you revolve around your team? But just like you can revolve around your team can actually revolve around you too. The DPS is a very interesting role because, as we've said before, if you're a really good DPS, you can actually dominate games, you can carry games. And if your team can notice that and takes a hold of that, and you're that kind of person, you can utilize your team. If you're a pharmacy, there's so many ways to set you up for success, right? If you have an amazing Pharah, your team can know that and maybe revolve around that. Hey, let's set up our Pharah. Let's make our Pharah incredibly hard to kill. Let's give her a Mercy. Put a Zenyatta Orb on her too. Maybe we'll take a Zarya and put a shield on her too as well whenever she needs to.
Right.
And that can take over games as well. And sometimes there's a misconception in compositions like that when like one team is just putting a ton of resources into this one DPS player, and then the enemy team starts freaking out and probably starts blaming their own DPS. Like, hey, why are you not being able to deal with this Genji? Why are you not getting kills? Like, he's getting kills. And the reason
5
is,
players worth of resources into that.
The reason is because that player has a ton of resources put into it. One of the funniest things to me is when somebody criticizes the hit scan player for not being able to kill the pharmacy. And it's like, well, you're basically putting one player on a 1v2 the entire matchup. You're asking your McCree to go kill a Mercy and a Pharah by himself. Why is he alone? Why not put a Mercy with your McCree too? You want your McCree to succeed and keep the Pharah away? Babysit him, just like they're babysitting their Pharah. So something to keep in mind. If I know this is not under your control as a DPS player, and if you're playing that role, but also keep in mind that you have limitations, right? It's not a good idea for you to 2v1 somebody the entire match, or 3v1, right? Like if the Genji has permanent healing orb, don't be dueling 1v1.
There's only so much you can do.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's 2 people v1 at that. Like he has resources from the rest of your team. So if you're playing with DPS, make sure that you're giving them the tools to succeed, right? Pay attention to what the enemy team is doing and why your DPS is struggling. Are they struggling because you're not providing them resources? Now, it's a different story if you are providing them resources and then we can still do a thing. Then maybe a swap of heroes is appropriate, right? But there's so many things that go into it before even thinking about swapping. Like, is your positioning good? Are you providing them resources? Do you have maybe the right heroes to go counter the other ones, etc.?
Mm-hmm. This is just such a deep topic because it overlaps with everything in the game. Like if we're going to be isolating DPS or isolating tank or isolating support as a role, everything you want to do is overlapping with them and how you synergize with them. So you basically have to either plan to flex or plan to force them to do it. You kind of have that mentality when you're playing. And so if you're like, hey, I see one hero that I can synergize with, I'm picking this and I'm not switching until they switch. Or that's a mentality you can take. And the other thing too in this whole mentality is Andres and I have been talking almost exclusively about heroes only. We touched briefly on map limitations, but that is gigantic. Like, map limitations are huge for your hero pool. And furthermore, playstyle is kind of the third dimension here. We have hero synergies. We have map decisions, like what we're picking based off of the map and the side we're on, attack or defense. And then on top of that, we're also picking based off of how we're going to play that hero. Sometimes you need to play sometimes you need to play the Symmetra, that is the one that shoots the orbs, the one that sets up the teleporters and throws the little things, the sentries. And sometimes you're literally sitting next to a Reinhardt beaming down anything that gets near. You have these different playstyles with her, or maybe you have different playstyles with Widowmaker. You're playing super tight on your squad. You're basically playing pretty close, or maybe you're just playing high ground, or maybe you're playing super far back. These different styles of play can be completely contingent on your playstyle, how you're adjusting to an enemy team comp or your own, and how you're adjusting to what opportunities or what places you can even be because of the map.
There's definitely a lot of play styles you can do with heroes. You can even do flank Symmetra. I actually had an amazing Symmetra on the enemy team recently, where I mean it was a feels Batman, but she had this move really practiced. She would like throw 3 turrets down at her feet, and then she would teleport behind us, kind of like the new Reapers have been doing, where they just aim the teleporter straight behind the enemy team, and then the teleporter would appear. She would come out with a fully charged beam already, and then the 3 turrets would be down below her. So if you were like in the back line or something, she would delete you immediately, and then she would teleport back. And I was like, oh my God, this Symmetra is doing some fancy moves over here, but completely different
like
style.
A fast food restaurant.
Yeah.
She got her burger and fries and she is out.
But yeah, like you said, Rob, I think that the more we talk about this topic, the more apparent it becomes that it's a very broad topic, and especially with DPS, which is the largest category that we have in the game right now. Hopefully we'll be revisiting this topic. We want to talk about roles in particular and how to play your roles. Maybe with DPS, we can sort of break it down a little bit more and just maybe talk about certain groups of DPS and a little bit more nuance about those. We definitely want to do this with supports and tanks as well. And like Rob said at the top of the show, hopefully we can bring in some really cool guests, some really experienced guests in those particular roles to kind of help us with the conversation. As for now, just let us know what you think of this episode. This is sort of a new thing that we're trying out. We're excited about it. I think it's a great idea. And now that role lock is here, it's very relevant. It actually makes sense to talk about roles in particular, since that's how you're going to be playing the game.
Yeah, we're genuinely curious as to how you kind of feel about us guinea pigging this topic. We're kind of very wanting. This is one of those times again where we're kind of testing the water, seeing what sticks, what stuff do you guys like. Sometimes Andres and I want to sit here and shoot the wind on something. We want to talk about it. This is one of those things where we weren't really sure where we were going to go. We had a couple beats that we wanted to hit and a couple things that we knew that we wanted to talk about. But as Andres said, things evolve and things get more and more broad, and we realize, oh, well, what about this? Or what about this? And this is important to know too. And so at the end of the day, it ends up being that you kind of have to know a lot about things going into the game to climb. And if you're also knowing a lot of things about the game, you also have to start plugging away, putting in the hours, which is also a very underutilized skill of putting in the time to get good at something. It's one of the hardest things to one of the hardest pills to swallow for me as a player. And also one of the things that I preach to anyone that's struggling at low ranks. The common denominator is not playing enough in most cases, or playing with the wrong people. That also happens too. But anyways, we really want to know what you think about this. If you want us to do it with the other ones, kind of test those too. We don't mind doing those sort of things. We love talking about them. And I think it's time to get out of here. Yeah, let's get through some closing remarks here. So the first thing is that we do not have any new patrons for this week, but if you'd like to support us, patreon.com/OmnicLab is your one-stop shop to support the show with the highest monetary amount that you can get. And by that, I mean, if you support us on Twitch, which our Twitch stream has subs and we're affiliates, you can sub there. On Twitch Prime, you can use that. But of the highest density of what money you send to us that we actually get, Patreon's the highest. So we use that. If you want to support us, do that. You can also take advantage of the coaching we mentioned at the top of the show if you're at the platinum and diamond levels. In addition to that, we would like to use this moment to remind a lot of you, there's a good chunk of folks that did get their payments declined for whatever reason. I talked with a couple of people this week about it that just asked me, like, something came up, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do. You may just check it. I don't know. So check your payments, talk with us. We'll get back with you. And that's going to do it for Patreon and our Twitch stream. Andres, you want to talk about our 3 iTunes reviews? 3 iTunes reviews that we got in the space of a week. That's insane.
You guys are being real cool over here. I'll start with the shortest one from a huge Earn in the USA. He says, good job, guys. Very knowledgeable podcast. Thank you very much, huge Earn. We also have Shepherd's Veil. This actually has been one of the guys that I've been coaching.
Our Diamond sponsor.
Yeah, Diamond sponsor. And also I've been coaching. He has improved so much and he's been super excited. He sent me a message. He was stuck, I think, in low bronze. And he's been making some great strides, especially after Roll Q came out. I really enjoy coaching him. Yeah, he's a great guy. But he says, armed with the curious minds and deep understanding of the game of Overwatch, the hosts take us on a strategy roller coaster each week of ideas that many of us have never thought of. They use what is the newest and hottest news in Overwatch to theory craft what tactic and combinations of heroes may lead to the biggest results. Ooh, fancy. Andres and Rob thrive off the interaction with their audience and the desire for each of us to be better players. They want you to connect with them, express your concerns, toss them any ideas, or just say, hey, thanks. They also offer private coaching for their Patreon, which I've used in the last 4 months to climb in the competitive ladder. I highly suggest it. If you're into Overwatch, you're simply missing out unless you're subscribed to Omnic Lab. So, wow, dude, you
what a great review.
Yeah, floored me with this review. You've encompassed really what we try to do with the show. We love Overwatch. We love learning video games, and we love learning Overwatch as well.
Shepherd's Veil PhD, ladies and gentlemen. After that wonderful essay, that was great.
And yeah,
you want me to read the last one?
Yeah, sure. I was just saying, interacting with you guys is like the thing that we cherish the most. Like, it's honestly, the whole reason why we even started the podcast.
And that's why the game nights will forever be free. Like, they're not Patreon exclusive. I don't know if we've ever said otherwise, but we might have. But there's some people that do Patreon specific stuff for that, but not us. We'll keep it for free. Zengar, education and coaching. I can't get enough of this podcast. What an amazing way to learn about Overwatch from the 2 of the most knowledgeable folks in the community. Well, that's very high praise that I cannot accept. I don't know about that, but there's certainly a lot of people out there. I appreciate Rob and Andres take the time to make their content digestible by the lower echelons of play and the upper tier alike, from giving broad tips to specific examples of micro improvements a player can make. Also, I just finished the coaching session with Andres, and I must say, what a pleasant human being to talk to.
Oh, thanks.
Well, you chose the right coach first, that's for sure. Well worth the Patreon investment to support the host, help keep the podcast going, and get a coaching session while you're at it. Not sponsored. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you guys doing these reviews. It's a huge boost to our self-improvement as coaches, as podcasters, as confirming our goals as a show. This helps us a lot, and it makes us feel good.
Yeah, it makes us know that we're doing things right. So thank you so much for letting us know.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you guys want to contact us, please check out first our website, omniclab.com, and there is a links page, omniclab.com/links. You can find links to everything. We do have a YouTube page. It's very underutilized. We get constantly. I'm having lots of like crazy issues, like putting them up in time with our releases, so they're kind of unsynced. But if you do want to catch the VODs, that's the best place to go catch them. And we do have merch. We have T-shirts. We've got mugs. We've got stuff like that. You can take advantage of that. You can hang out with us in the community. Game night tomorrow. Please show up. It's fun. It's long. We'll probably anticipate a lot of people, including the hosts, leaving a little bit early to get in their WoW queues, which is what Andres and I have been slam dunking lately.
Oh my god,
on,
WoW
White
Classic. WoW Classic. The
I've
only
been
reason it
loving
hasn't
that.
consumed my life is because the queues are way too long. The queues are saving
So we
me.
have time to play Overwatch in queue for WoW. So yeah, if you guys want to play with us, let us know. If you're curious about other things, just let us know. We'd love to talk to you. So the best way to do it is Discord for sure. We'll see you there. And Andres, you can find him on Twitter at
I Play Games. You spell that IPLAI Games.
You can find me at Not Rob and Not Rob May on Twitch. And hopefully you guys can see us around this weekend. And if you don't, we hope you have a great rest of the month, and we'll see you guys in September. See you then. Bye.
Bye.
Don't be your lab rat. Be a scientist.